What happens when Hollywood's most outspoken actor sits down with daytime television's most controversial host? The answer might surprise you. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that had producers scrambling and the entire studio on edge, make sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments what you think really caused Joy Behar to storm off the set. Trust us, you won't see this coming. The atmosphere inside the View studio felt different that morning. There was an unmistakable tension hanging in the air as Mark Wahlberg took his seat. Despite the early hour, he carried his usual confidence, greeting the audience with a calm smile. Joy Behar, never one to avoid controversy, wore the familiar expression longtime viewers recognized immediately. Leaning forward with a smile that barely reached her eyes, she opened the interview. "So, Mark, let's talk about your latest project. Another tough guy role. Do you ever get tired of playing the same character over and over again?" Mark shifted slightly in his chair, his jaw tightening just enough for the cameras to notice. "Well, Joy, if you actually watched my films instead of just reading the headlines, you'd probably see there's a lot more depth to those characters than you're giving me credit for." The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the playful conversation they had expected. Joy smiled confidently. "Oh, I've seen enough. Let's be honest. You've built an entire career playing different versions of Mark Wahlberg. The tough Boston guy with a heart of gold. Different movie, different clothes, same performance." The audience fell silent. Even Whoopi Goldberg looked uncomfortable as she tried to step in. "I think what Joy is trying to say." "No," Mark interrupted firmly. "Let her finish. I'd really like to hear more of this expert film analysis." Joy raised an eyebrow, surprised by his response. "You don't have to be a film critic to recognize patterns. For 20 years you've played the same guy, the troubled neighborhood kid who eventually proves everyone wrong. That's your brand." "My brand?" Mark repeated, leaning forward as the cameras zoomed in. "If we're talking about brands, Joy, maybe we should talk about yours." The room became completely quiet. "How long have you been playing the exact same television personality? The commentator who tears down successful people because controversy gets ratings." Behind the cameras, producers exchanged nervous looks while quietly signaling each other. Neither Mark nor Joy seemed interested in backing down. Joy's face flushed. "Excuse me? Did you just call me bitter?" "I called it the way I see it," Mark replied evenly. "You've built a career taking cheap shots at people. When was the last time you focused on building someone up instead of tearing them down?" Sonny attempted to redirect the conversation. "Maybe we should move on." But Joy was already standing. "You want to talk about careers? I've been in this business longer than you've been making movies. I've built a reputation by speaking truth to power." Mark slowly stood as well, remaining calm but unmistakably intense. "Speaking truth is one thing," he answered. "Creating drama just to stay relevant is something completely different." The cameras captured every reaction around the table. Joy's hands trembled slightly, whether from frustration or adrenaline, no one could tell. The other hosts sat frozen, unsure whether stepping in would calm the situation or make it even worse. "I've been speaking my mind on television for decades," Joy shot back. "Don't you dare lecture me about relevance." Mark took a measured step forward. "Then start treating your guests with respect. Challenge them if you want, but stop relying on prepared ambushes and cheap gotcha moments." Joy folded her arms. "You knew exactly what kind of show you agreed to appear on. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe action movies are where you belong." The remark echoed across the silent studio. Mark's expression turned completely stone cold, the same calm, controlled look audiences had seen in his most powerful dramatic performances. Everyone watching knew the interview had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. "Simple dialogue," Mark replied with a faint smile. That's an interesting criticism coming from someone who built a career delivering the same punchlines to the same audience year after year. Joy stared at him in disbelief. In all her years on television, few guests had challenged her so directly. The audience fell completely silent, unsure whether they were witnessing an interview or a full-blown confrontation. "How dare you," Joy said, her voice trembling with anger. "You come onto this show and speak to me like that." "Your show?" Mark answered calmly. "Last time I checked, this is The View, not the Joy Behar Show. Everyone sitting at this table is supposed to have an opinion, not just one person." Behind the scenes, the control room erupted into confusion. Producers debated whether to cut to a commercial break while directors barked instructions through their headsets. Around the table, the other hosts watched in stunned silence, unable to predict what would happen next. Joy stood and began pacing across the stage, her frustration becoming impossible to hide. "You think you can walk in here and embarrass me?" she demanded. "You think making a few successful movies gives you the right to attack me personally?" "Attack you?" Mark replied. "I'm responding to the criticism you aimed at me the moment I sat down. You came prepared to question my career. I'm simply answering honestly. My opinion doesn't need your approval," Joy fired back. "You're a guest here, and you will treat me with respect." Mark let out a short laugh. "Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. Right now, you're asking for it without showing it." The tension inside the studio became overwhelming. Security quietly moved closer to the stage as a precaution, while audience members shifted nervously in their seats. Not a single person seemed willing to interrupt. Joy stopped pacing and faced Mark directly, her expression filled with determination. "So now you think I'm the problem?" "I've been working in television since before you became one of Hollywood's biggest stars," Joy replied. "I've survived changing networks, changing audiences, and every challenge this industry could throw at me. I don't need lessons from you." Mark nodded slowly. "I'm not questioning your experience. I'm questioning how you're using it. The moment someone disagrees with you, the conversation becomes personal." Joy folded her arms. "Your past is part of who you are, Mark. You can't pretend those years never happened." "I've never tried to," Mark answered. "I've owned every mistake I've made. The difference is I learned from them. Growth means admitting where you were wrong and trying to do better." Whoopi finally leaned forward. "Maybe we should all take a breath and move this discussion in another direction." "No," Joy interrupted without taking her eyes off Mark. "If he has something to say, let him finish." Mark sighed before continuing. "You think being tough means criticizing people from behind a desk. Real toughness is taking responsibility, accepting criticism yourself, and continuing to improve." The rest of the panel remained completely silent, unsure how the exchange would end. Sunny looked ready to speak but hesitated. Sarah glanced around the studio, hoping someone else would step in first. Joy lowered her voice. "Don't lecture me about doing better. I've spent my career speaking up for people who needed someone in their corner. I've never been afraid to say what I believe. And I respect standing up for your beliefs," Mark replied. "But there's a difference between challenging someone and trying to tear them down." Joy shook her head. "So what exactly have you done besides make blockbuster movies and give inspirational interviews?" Mark answered without hesitation. "I've invested in businesses, created jobs, supported charities, and tried to give back to the community that raised me. I don't talk about those things often because I don't do them for applause." Joy remained unconvinced. "You're still an entertainer, Mark. Let's not pretend movies change the world." "They may not change the whole world," Mark replied, "but if they inspire one person, help one family, or create opportunities for people behind the scenes, that's a contribution I'm proud of. Everyone has a different way of making a positive impact." The audience sat frozen, completely absorbed by the confrontation. Many leaned forward in their seats, watching every exchange as though they were ringside at a championship fight rather than a daytime talk show. The cameras moved seamlessly between Mark and Joy, capturing every expression as the tension continued to rise. Mark let out a short, humorless laugh. "So that's what you think? That confidence is the same as arrogance." "No, Joy. The problem isn't me. The problem is that you don't want a conversation, you want everyone to agree with you." Joy folded her arms. "I come prepared. I do my research before every interview." "And that's exactly how this started," Mark replied. "Not with curiosity, but with conclusions. You decided who I was before I even answered your first question." Joy shook her head. "At least I don't rely on charisma to avoid difficult questions." Mark looked genuinely surprised. "You think this is about charm?" "It's not. It's about respect." He paused before continuing. "You seem to believe that because you've spent decades behind this desk, you're entitled to treat guests however you want." Joy's expression hardened. "I treat people exactly the way they deserve to be treated. And right now," she added, "you're acting like someone who can't handle being challenged." For a brief moment, Mark remained silent. The studio waited for his response. Finally, he spoke in a calm, measured voice. "I've faced criticism my entire career. That's never been the issue. The issue is whether criticism is fair or whether it's designed to create headlines." Joy smiled sarcastically. "Now you're talking about success as if it proves you're right." "I'm talking about experience," Mark answered. "Success doesn't make someone correct, and neither does sitting behind this table. Respect goes both ways." Joy leaned forward. "So now Hollywood is going to lecture television?" Mark shook his head. "No. I'm saying nobody should believe they're beyond criticism, including me." Joy's voice rose again. "You couldn't answer one simple question without turning this into a personal argument." Mark responded immediately. It stopped being a simple question the moment it became a personal insult disguised as commentary. "There's a difference." The room fell quiet again. Whoopi tried once more to restore order. "Maybe this is a good time for a commercial break." Before she could finish, both Mark and Joy answered at the exact same moment. "No." For a split second, the synchronized response almost broke the tension, but neither of them smiled. Joy turned back toward him. "I want people watching at home to see exactly how you react when someone refuses to flatter you." Mark looked at her silently for several seconds. The anger on his face slowly faded, replaced by disappointment. "Joy," he finally said, "people can already see what's happening here." He spoke calmly, almost quietly. This was supposed to be a conversation. Instead, it became an argument because disagreement wasn't acceptable. Joy stared at him in disbelief. "So now you're accusing me of bullying?" "I'm saying conversations should involve listening as much as talking," Mark replied. "The moment someone pushes back, they're treated like the problem." The studio became almost perfectly silent. Even the production crew stopped moving as everyone waited for the next exchange. Joy stood motionless, studying Mark. "You really have no idea who you're talking to," she said softly. Mark never looked away. "I think I know exactly who I'm talking to." Neither of them moved. The silence stretched across the studio, making every second feel much longer than it really was. The other hosts exchanged nervous glances, realizing the conversation had gone far beyond anything they had expected. Finally, Joy spoke again. "You know what your problem is, Mark." Her voice was calmer now, but every word carried sharp determination. "You've reinvented yourself over the years, and somewhere along the way you started believing that makes you better than everyone else." Mark's expression softened slightly. "There's no performance here, Joy. I'm simply responding to someone who judged me before giving me a chance to speak. He paused. But if we're talking about public images, maybe we should remember that every public figure has one, including you. Joy frowned. My public image? Yes, Mark replied. The fearless truth teller. The person who never backs away from controversy. He looked around the studio before finishing. But real honesty isn't about humiliating people. It isn't about winning arguments. It's about challenging ideas while still respecting the person you're talking to. Joy's face tightened. You think I've been disrespectful? I think you've forgotten what made audiences connect with you in the first place, Mark answered. People respected you because you challenged opinions. The challenge is making sure those conversations remain fair, even when you strongly disagree. You used to make people laugh because your observations were clever, Mark said evenly. Now it feels like you're trying to win arguments by being harsh, and those aren't the same thing. The words settled over the studio, leaving the audience speechless. Joy stood motionless, her hands clenched tightly at her sides as she struggled to contain her emotions. So now you're going to psychoanalyze me? Joy asked, her voice carefully controlled. Let's talk about your temper. Let's talk about the image you've built around overcoming your past, and how you've turned that story into your entire identity. Mark didn't react immediately. He simply looked at her before responding. My temper? Joy, you've been raising your voice through most of this conversation. Maybe we're both frustrated, but pretending it's only one-sided isn't fair. Joy shook her head. Don't tell me what I should or shouldn't see. I know exactly who I am. I've spent my career calling out people who deserve to be challenged. And you think I'm one of those people? Mark asked. I think you're presenting an image that's easier for the public to admire than the real person behind it. Mark nodded slowly. This is the real me. Someone who refuses to stay silent when he's being judged before he's even had a chance to answer. Joy let out a short laugh. You think this is an attack? This is what happens when someone asks difficult questions instead of giving you an easy publicity interview. Mark answered immediately. Difficult questions are fine. But questions are meant to invite answers. What we've had so far has been a series of conclusions. He paused. You didn't ask me to explain my choices. You told me what you believed about them before I even spoke. The audience remained completely silent, listening to every word. I'm not embarrassed by being challenged, Mark continued. I'm only asking for the same fairness I'd offer anyone sitting across from me. Joy's expression changed instantly. So you think I'm the one who should be embarrassed? I think everyone watching can decide for themselves, Mark replied calmly. They've seen how this conversation unfolded from the beginning. Joy's voice grew louder. You're accusing me of being unprofessional. I'm saying this interview stopped being about ideas a long time ago. The tension became almost unbearable. That's enough, Joy declared. If you can't respect this program, maybe this interview should end. The audience gasped quietly while the production crew exchanged anxious looks. Mark remained standing beside his chair, speaking in a calm, measured tone. I came here because I accepted an invitation. I'd like to finish the conversation respectfully. Joy folded her arms. You were invited here to discuss your latest film. And that's exactly what I expected to do, Mark answered. Instead, we ended up debating each other's character. Around the table, the remaining hosts looked increasingly uncomfortable, hoping someone would finally redirect the discussion. Mark took a slow breath. I haven't been trying to attack you. I've simply been responding to the criticism directed at me. Joy paced across the stage again. So now you're saying this is my fault. I'm saying interviews work best when both people are willing to listen. Joy stopped and turned toward him. You have no idea what you've started. Mark remained composed. I'm not interested in creating conflict. I came here for a conversation. He looked around the studio before adding one final thought. But if disagreement immediately becomes personal, then maybe that's something every public conversation should reflect on. The room fell silent once again. Even the cameras seemed to linger on the expressions around the table as everyone realized the interview had become about far more than a movie promotion. No one knew who would speak next, but everyone understood that the atmosphere in the studio had changed completely. Joy stopped pacing and turned to face Mark, her expression filled with frustration. "I don't belong in this business," she repeated. "I've spent decades building my career. I've earned my place here, and I've earned the right to ask difficult questions." Mark nodded. "You've absolutely earned the right to ask tough questions. But asking tough questions isn't the same as making personal attacks and expecting no response." Joy folded her arms. "You live in Hollywood, Mark. Don't lecture me about the real world." Mark answered without hesitation. "I grew up in Boston, Joy. I know what the real world looks like. And one thing I've learned is that if you challenge people, you should also expect them to challenge you." The audience remained silent as the tension continued to build. Joy took a deep breath before speaking again. "So now you're talking about consequences." "Only this," Mark replied. "Every conversation has consequences. The way we speak to people matters." Joy shook her head. "The consequence is that I won't forget this interview anytime soon." Mark remained calm. "I'm not here to make enemies. I'm here to defend myself when I feel I've been judged unfairly." Joy's voice sharpened. "So you're saying this entire argument is my fault?" "I'm saying both of us had a choice in how this conversation unfolded." For the first time, Mark's tone softened. "You know, Joy, I actually remember watching you years ago. You were sharp, funny, and incredibly quick. People admired your wit because it challenged ideas without losing its sense of humor." He paused. "Today, though, it feels like the conversation became more about winning than understanding." The words seemed to catch Joy off guard. She stood quietly for a moment before responding. "You don't know me, Mark. You don't know what I've experienced, what I've worked for, or what it took to build this career." Mark nodded respectfully. "You're right. I don't know everything about you. But audiences have watched you for years, just as they've watched me. Everyone forms their own opinion based on what they see." The studio fell silent once again. Neither of them spoke for several long seconds. Finally, Joy removed her microphone and placed it carefully on the table. "I think this conversation has gone as far as it can," she said quietly. "I'm done." Without another word, she turned and walked away from the set. The audience watched in stunned silence while the remaining hosts exchanged uncertain glances, unsure how to respond. The cameras continued rolling as the studio remained unusually quiet. Mark looked around the table before offering a respectful nod. "I never wanted this interview to end this way," he said calmly. "I came here expecting a conversation, and I hope someday that's what we can actually have." The hosts remained silent as producers prepared to bring the segment to a close. The unexpected ending left everyone in the studio with one lingering question: when strong opinions collide, where should the line between honest debate and personal conflict be drawn? If you enjoyed this dramatic story, share your thoughts in the comments below. Who do you think handled the situation better? And don't forget to subscribe for more celebrity stories, discussions, and entertainment features.